Well, our third album. Where do we start with our friend Diddy, guys? In the year of our Lord
Should we just give a
2024 in December.
disclaimer?
We've gone through R. Kelly. You know what I
We
mean?
have, you're right.
Before, so I mean, we could do R. And we've also covered lots and lots of messy people. Let's not just pretend that R. Kelly and Diddy. We've covered Michael Jackson and any number of rock and roll bands with any number of troubling histories with sleeping with underage, women as well. So, we've been here. We've also done things like, we've covered Selena, and like the difficulty that came from that, right, with the murder.
Right, but we
long
don't cover a guy that's currently in prison. So
No, well, yeah,
or,
no.
for the extent
I mean,
of charges also. I mean,
also,
R.
as we're
Kelly's
recording this, depending on when you're listening to this, because in YouTube things live forever, right? But we're recording this in December of 2024 near Christmas. And Diddy, Sean Combs, Puff Daddy, P. Diddy. I think he went by Love for a while, recently, as a rebrand that didn't go as well. He's obviously an incredibly messy figure. Who he is going to have to kind of spill a little bit into our review of this, but I think we'll try best we can to also talk about this album, because this album, if we're able to divorce what, Diddy is now, this was a massive, massive album in 1997.
Yeah,
so it's kind of an album we definitely want to talk about, because it's hard to talk about hip hop in the 90s and not talk about, Diddy, Bad Boy, and, this album, because this was the biggest album of 1997. So if we just cut this out, we'd be giving away the highest selling album of 1997, right?
Right.
At least in the non-country world. So, yeah, I don't even know if we need to do a bio, although I've kind of realized that, for people that are older than us, and, we're kind of all in the era where, this was a big album, right, in our pop culture.
Absolutely.
People that are older, I think Puff Daddy's just a figure that stands out to them as much because they remember his name, and, he'll always be Puff Daddy to them. As much as they know he's Diddy, they'll be like, Puff Daddy, or isn't he something else? Did he change his, you know what I mean, for them, right? And so he's sort of like a figure, right? Maybe they know he dated J-Lo. And for younger people, he's just in the culture, but people don't even, I think, process him as a musician or a producer, right? He's just who's Diddy, right? He's Diddy, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
He's almost like what Jay-Z is now, right? I've definitely talked to people who are under the age of 20 and they didn't totally realize Jay-Z was a rapper, which cracks me up.
Wow.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's how, but you think about it, he hasn't really released
that's
stuff
true.
in 12 years, right? So Diddy even more so. I think people are just if you say to people under 20, who's Diddy? And they don't start with Sex Pest, right? The next thing will be oh, doesn't he do Sean John or he's just Diddy, you know what I mean? Stuff like that. So you almost forget that he had this whole music career, but this is technically Puff Daddy and the family, because he's got everybody on this, right? He's got the ghost of Notorious B.I.G. He's got Little Kim. He's got Black Rob. He's got the Locks. He's got Mace. He's got Faith Evans. All the Bad Boy crew.
Throwing the kitchen sink.
He's got the kitchen sink there, and he's also got the kitchen sink of samples that he mostly didn't pay for on this album as well. Yeah. But you could say a lot of things about Puffy, right, or Diddy, but I mean, the man knew exactly what commercially successful songs to bring back to the 1990s. So, instead of going full bio for this one, because we'll be able to weave it in, it's going to be impossible to talk about it. What do we even say about this album, guys? Let's try to cover it as an album first. Jeff, let's start with you. No Way Out, Puff Daddy and the Fam.
Yeah, so, I wasn't the biggest Puff Daddy fan growing up. I mean, I love
and I can co-sign that. I knew you at the time, and it wasn't just oh, he's messy now. Yeah, this is who you are.
I love Notorious B.I.G. I mean, he was definitely number one artist on Bad Boy, and for me, all the others, they were okay, and I know that Puffy was kind of behind the scenes. He was kind of the production guy, or you could actually argue that he wasn't the production guy because he had a whole team of people who helped put this album together, but he was more of the business guy.
The hype man, I'd almost say, is what the curator.
The hype man, and through all the orgies, I guess, like I don't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a reason he was the party planner. You know what I mean? Like, for better or worse. Yeah.
Exactly. But I was never a fan, and I honestly was not a fan of this album. I think just in addition to the lazy sampling, I think there were a few tracks where he did go to his producers, try to cook up some original beats, but they all fell short. I think this album was way too long. I was actually, it was,
Jeff, you're lucky you don't do this on a weekly basis, because even though this was way too long, boy, you didn't sit through a 3-6 Mafia album that went 86 minutes last week.
Oh, jeez. It had its hits, if you count the the singles, I think it was 4 or 5 singles. I mean, that in of itself is almost an album. I counted 3 other tracks. I think there was a couple of them. Pain, Do You Know? I'll put in Is This the End? As kind of the introspective, oh my gosh, my best friend and top artist died in there. But this could have easily been eight tracks, and you could have called it a day. The others, it was just kind of forgettable. The other tracks for me. And even with those standout singles, I mean, you're covering Bowie, Let's Dance. You're covering, all of these, Rocky soundtrack, which I actually liked Victory. I think out of all of them, I actually like that track
no
the
question.
most.
Victory is the best track. Yes.
Yeah. So, the Police you're covering, it's just
Victory's a Biggie song. Let's be real.
It's the best song.
It's got the Busta sample. I got the real line. It's basically a Biggie song with Busta singing the hook. Yeah.
It's he was on his deathbed. Let me just record this last track or something, Biggie. Put this on the album,
and then let's have them use it for Fight Night 2009, as the opener, so John gets stuck in his head for life.
So I mean, I mean, not a fan. I mean, I think commercially successful, but I mean, back in the day, I kept away from this album, and just listening to it in its entirety just kind of validated that, I did the right choice by just kind of steering clear, even though all of these, 4 or 5 singles were all over MTV, and I just couldn't escape them. But so that's my take.
Why do you think why it was so successful, Jeff? Do you have any sense of that, looking back? Why the album sold so much compared to other rap groups that we like and things like that? Yeah.
I think it was kind of, Biggie was immensely popular. And the I'll Be Missing You, it was the tail end of that. And that was the MTV heyday. So he cashed in on that. And it's a good track. I mean, it's heartfelt, it's sentimental. It's, I think Faith Evans is singing a nice hook. It's a good track. But I think it's, what John was saying, he's a businessman. And I think he he's let me just kind of cash it in. I'm gonna cash in right now with my own solo album after one of my top artists dies, and I'm gonna throw the kitchen sink. I'm gonna bring the whole family. Mm-hmm. We're gonna go to some island and do some things, and party and stuff. But I think he just kind of knew the timing, maybe on kind of on the business side. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say he had kind of a creative. A creative kind of outburst, and he's man, I got so much to say. I mean, even in those tracks where he was kind of more introspective and stuff, I'm geez, this is so long and drawn out. So I think for him it was just kind of timing wise, he was behind so many best-selling artists in the 90s, and he's all right, let me just it's my time to kind of put out an album.
Yeah, I think he was an immensely successful producer, and he was a salesman and marketer. He was really good at packaging kind of his brand, I think, and also kind of the lifestyle too. I think he's really capitalizing on this album, like with the gangster lifestyle, right? Like live hard, die young type of idea. There's no question that Puff Daddy is the weakest like rapper of all the people on this album, on the tracks. I would think. I think he, at least he's like smart enough to like get out of his own way sometimes and like let other people shine on this album, because you do have a kitchen sink guest artists on this album. This album, I never listened to this album in whole. I think, like to Jeff's point, I always knew about the singles and like the videos, and this album in some sense, or the singles on this album, are very formative for my like kind of beginning of liking rap. This, like the songs on this, I'll Be Missing You, All About the Benjamins, Can't Nobody Hold Me Down. I remember those like in middle school, like hearing those songs for the first time on like the radio or the videos. And then also like Hypnotize by Biggie was another big one, formative one. And then like the Foxy Brown song I'll Be, for whatever reason, that song also. So those are kind of like the like foundational rap songs that kind of really got me into rap. Maybe the Fugees also, but the so I think in some ways this is like a more palatable kind of like radio friendly version of rap that was out at the time too. The samples are not like complex. The sampling is another weak part about this album. They just straight up rapping over. We've commented on that before, things like MC Hammer, and there was another album that did that a lot too, that I'm drawing a blank on, but it's definitely lazy, I feel like, and not, it's one thing to like mix up take a part of a song and kind of remake it into something new, and which is what all the kind of best producers and beat makers do, but this is just kind of derivative and lazy in my opinion. But the singles still hit for me, and I really appreciate kind of, this album is in 97, so it's not quite where we are. This is later. This is kind of the latest album we've talked about in the show up to this point, so we're not quite where Jay-Z has come onto the scene yet. So hearing Jay-Z and just kind of his ability, Foxy Brown, Lil' Kim, the Twista, I did like that Twista song, and that Is This the End? That was fun hearing him, and then like we said, the Notorious B.I.G. is the clear standout lyricist, rapper on this track. So in one sense, I kind of have like a certain nostalgia for some of these songs, and then the lifestyle, like, I don't think this is the Hype Williams yet, but the videos like of them driving in the desert and like Can't Nobody Hold Me Down,
there definitely is Hype Williams directed videos for this.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then All About the Benjamins too. I remember that when is that the one where they're on the stage or whatever in like a club or something?
It's like black and green.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
like the whole,
Yeah. So
it's like a wind tunnel. Like it's like they're, well, he used wind tunnels multiple. There's the one where he and Mo Money Mo Problems is where like he and Mace are blowing in a wind. But this is different. It's like, it's almost like the Alice in Chains video, like Grind. It's kind of the same effect. Anyway, that's a deep cut there.
Yeah. But so but yeah, Jeff, this album is way too long. Definitely. Some of the deeper tracks I liked were Is This the End? I liked Young G's because Jay-Z is clearly like Jay-Z and Notorious B.I.G. are on that track. So that's a good one. I'm kind of mid on Black Rob. I don't know if he's that great. The Locks are kind of interesting too, but and that Senorita song, when they start like making the sex noises, I'm like, I can't listen anymore to that. Yeah, so how do I feel about this album? I guess I kind of like it, but it's really just the certain tracks. Victory, as Jeff said too, is like probably the best track on the album, but so it's a thumbs in the middle for me on this one. What about you, John?
I'm on Team Jeff for this one. A lot of the singles are not good on this album. Been Around the World, I'll Be Missing You, Can't Nobody Hold Me Down. I dislike all three of those songs and always have. Nobody Hold Me Down is like Diddy and Mace, who are both very below average rap. Although it is funny, there's like the quality of MC has dropped enough where like How Bad Diddy and Mace doesn't stand out to me as much as it did in like 1997, where I'm like, oh my god, like
you mean like
bad.
Contemporary rappers to contemporary? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's more like very not so good rappers in the culture now. Like, and in 1997, they're outside of, like I said, like No Limit, right? Like there weren't many guys that just weren't good, right? Like, and there were lots of people that were really, really, really good, right? You know what I mean? So like, it stood out even more. Victory I always have liked, and the reason, like I said before, is it's basically like a Biggie song with Busta Rhymes singing like a kick-ass hook right along the way, and Puffy did the right amount of being in it, right? Like he talked over it, which as long as he's talking over or doing a small bar, I don't mind it, you know what I mean? It can even work. All About the Benjamins is funny because like each verse gets better like than the verse before it, so it stacks on itself. So like the second to last verse is Little Kim, and she has a great verse on that one, and then Biggie kills it at the end of that. But like, and then like even the locks go in the order of like their talent, right? Like it ends with Jada Kiss, who's the strongest of the locks, right? And like Styles P is in the middle, right? Who's in the middle of it. And I always forget the third dude from the Locks' name, right? Because like there's like a clear hierarchy of how good they are. But like even in Bad Boy, right? There's Biggie, who's the best, right? And then Lil' Kim is the second best by quite a bit, right? And then like Jada Kiss, followed by Styles P, right?
And Sheik Louch is the third one.
Yeah.
I just looked it up.
He's not as good as Jada Kiss and Styles P.
Yeah.
In fact, Jada Kiss has most of the best verses. I think of like something like 24 Hours to Live and stuff. Like, you know, when the Locks are on an album, he's always the guy that like stands out. And he had a career of his own, and his stuff was good too. And then like once you get like under the Locks, right? Like I'd say Black Rob is not terrible, right? Like the track "Whoa," right, is the one I always think of. Whoa, you know, like and stuff like that.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah. And, you know, Craig Mack's not on this one, but then maybe him, and then you get like Mace and Puffy, who are just like corny, right? And you've got guys like Jay-Z and stuff floating around. But at the end of the day, like what Bad Boy kind of is it's really like Notorious B.I.G. is so good that you overlook the samples. And it's not that I think Puff Daddy picks bad stuff. You know, Mo Money, Mo Problem samples Upside Down by Diana Ross, which is an objectively great song, right? On this one, he's grabbing like Every Breath You Take by The Police, great song. The Message, right, by Grandmaster Flash and the Fierce Fight, great song. Let's Dance by Bowie, as Jeff mentioned. The Rocky side. These are not, all of these are great things, but it's just lazy. It's like, let me just slap this down and rap over. It doesn't have like, you know, in the early days of hip hop, right? Like that's kind of how you did things, right? But like what hip hop was then was like you were at a party, right? You weren't trying to sell 7 million albums. Like when you're doing it at a party, it works. When you're selling 7 million albums and listening to the radio, I just always thought also the like Bad Boy like image, right, was corny. I'll be honest. So like it was always a little try hard kind of, and like it was like aspirational, I think, and I kind of chafe at anything that's aspirational, you know. And like Puff Daddy's whole brand, and it has turned out to be that I was a little bit observant on this. I'm like, he kind of has like two worlds, right? Like on one hand, he's like in hip hop, right? And like trying to be tough enough to be hip hop. I think we all learned that like maybe he was the real gangster instead of like the phony gangster that we thought. But then also there is that like idea of like, I want to cross over and like be like live in the Hamptons, right? With like all the rich white dudes, which like Jay-Z shares with him, right? Like that whole idea. And it's a little bit of my knock on Jay-Z a little bit sometimes, that like he can come off corny sometimes. And that's kind of my take. I don't think this album ages well at all. There's a reason like people remember Notorious B.I.G. but don't remember this album, right?
For
Even
sure.
though it sold 7 million. And I think it is sort of that it was of its time. You said like, why was this popular? You're right, Josh. It was like the imagery and it was an aspirational time in the culture, and we don't recognize it as much, Josh, because like you said, this is 97 and we're still in 95 on the regular shows, right? So that 2-year period does make a big difference in terms of where hip hop is going and where the culture is. It's kind of the difference between Rage Against the Machine releasing Evil Empire and doing rap rock, and like Nookie,
right.
you know, like 3 years later, you know, they're both doing rap rock, but they both sort of speak to the moments they're in, right? You know, along the way. So yeah, I can't give this one, this is a thumbs down for me. And much like Jeff, you know, it wasn't this wasn't on the stereo from time to time when I was there, but you know, like maybe you put like Mo Money, Mo Problems, and certainly some stuff from Life After Death on. Maybe Victory gets in my car, but you know, for me, even back then, you know, Been Around the World and Can't Nobody Hold Me Down, and I always thought I'll Be Missing You was such a shitty song. It was just such a clear cash grab derivative thing. It just I just felt it was so fucking lazy the whole time, and just I don't know. It felt like exploitative even in the moment. So it kind of grossed me out a little bit, if I'm being honest. So yeah, that's where I stand on this one.
All right.